Hi, everybody. Hi. My name is Stephanie, so I will be the facilitator for this panel. So I'm actually a first-year college student at UC Berkeley right now, but but I am with Californians for Justice, and it's an organization that I joined like 3 years ago, and it was like the organization that really impacted me and got me to UC Berkeley. So for the past 3 years, I've been working with our campaign that Californians for Justice has, and it's called Relationship Centered Schools, which really just focuses on like 3 separate like buckets or topics that are most impactful, or that we got from surveys from students across California that they believe that the most impactful thing in school are relationships, and with their teachers, staff, and it's like really just building that trust in order for them to feel safe at school. So the 3 topics that the campaign really just focuses on is making space for relationship building, which is something that's not really like thought about. The second one is making room for student voice, and then the third one is to like just, oh my God, I see myself. I'm like, what? Okay. I'm so sorry. And yeah, so making space for relationship building, student voice, and then the third one would just be, what's the third bucket? I already forgot. Invest in staff. Exactly. So the work that I've been doing with Californians for Justice for the past 3 years has really just been focusing on, like, in order to get teachers to make those relationships with students, to make students feel better at school, is for them to be invested in. So it's really just in focusing on like a learning environment. It's not just a student, it's really just a teacher, the staff, everyone on campus. So I know for one, one thing that I recall when I was in school was like when I was going through a really difficult time, in my life, a teacher just simply writing a note on my paper and saying that she wanted to know how I was feeling was something very impactful for me, and it made me want to do something for her, like make her feel proud, do better in school for her because of that simple thing. And things like that are just very impactful for a student, and for that reason is for why I'm like here working for School Climate, because it's really not something that's really focused on. So I'll just move on and like the rest of us introduce ourselves. So I'll go to, who would like to go first? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Marshé.
So my name is Marshé Dawes. I am a student leader in the organization Students Deserve. Our ultimate goal is to make sure that Black Lives Matter in schools. And that is our goal because a lot of times in school we become overlooked, or there are a high rate of school arrest, suspensions, getting kicked out of class. There's not a lot of resources for Black and brown students. And that is our overall campaign and goal, and we do smaller campaigns to make sure that we can reach this goal ultimately, like ending racist or criminalizing policies such as random searches, which we just won an end to on June 18th. So, yay. I got involved with this work because at the time when I was getting random search from 6th grade up to my 12th grade year, I didn't realize that it was something that didn't happen everywhere. It only happens in 4% of schools in the United States. And those schools that it happened in are primarily Black and brown communities. And because I've only lived in a Black and brown community my entire life, it was normal for me. And this has been happening to me since I was in the 6th grade. I've been seeing it happen to me since I was in the 6th grade. It's just like, I thought it was like a rite of passage. You grow up, this is what happens to you. But it turns out that's not true. When I was getting searched one day, my sophomore year, the woman who searched me told me that she took my hand sanitizer. She told me that she took it from me because she knew what I was gonna do with it. I was gonna sniff it and get high. She knows my type, and I'm just like, what's my type? Like, what does that even mean? Is it because I'm low income? I went to Dorsey High School. Like, what is my type? Just like, I know what you kids use hand sanitizer for, but in reality, our school's so underfunded that we don't have any soap in our bathrooms every day, so I need hand sanitizer. I don't want to be sick. So once I found that out, I got invited to a meeting that happened, and I realized that it only happened in 4% of schools, and that pretty much lit a fire inside of me, and I didn't feel like that was right. I felt like I was being lied to and mistreated, and I was getting all of this harm done to me for no reason. And once I pretty much had that support and people encouraging me to speak up and use my voice, that's when I decided to, go full throttle and fight for justice.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Yeung. I'm the Economic Justice Program Manager at the RYSE Center. I'm not a student. I think maybe my youthful appearance, maybe carried me only so far, but really, really grateful to be sharing space with powerful youth leaders. And really the spaces that I feel most comfortable is lifting up young people. So the RYSE Center is a wraparound service youth center based out of Richmond, California. We're a 10-year-old organization born out of a youth organizing project where young people mobilized in their schools and communities in response to community and interpersonal oppression and violence. With that mandate from the young people, we decided to create a safe space that was grounded in social justice, that is rooted in liberation and love and healing. And that is the work moving forward and in continuum. So really grateful to be here. We do a lot of collaboration in and outside of the schools, ultimately centered around young people and how do we shift the conditions and systems to realize liberation and freedom for young people of color, for queer and trans youth, for Black, Indigenous, Brown, anyone that has been systemically and structurally exposed to harm.
Hello, everybody. Sorry. Hello, my name is Shelly Gaptor, and I am a 5th grade teacher at Prairie Elementary, which is in South Sac, but it is actually a part of Elk Grove Unified School District. I have been an educator for 26 years, most of it a lot of it in Elk Grove, but I also taught 5 years in Richmond, also taught in Pittsburgh for a couple of years. So most of my career has been in 6th grade. And I believe, as being a teacher who's been working in Title I schools all of my career, that I've been doing this work my entire time. I didn't name it, but it was just work that I've been doing because I work with students of color every single day. Obviously, I'm not a student, but I am very, very happy and feel like I'm kind of like sitting on the sidelines. These are the experts, and I'm really pleased to be with these wonderful young people here today.
Hello. Okay. So the first question will be, I guess, for us. So I guess I'll answer too. I'll ask to you directly though. So can you share about your campaign, your local and statewide, that you're currently working on? What led you to be part of this campaign, and why is this important for all of us to hear of that campaign today?
Okay. Students Deserve is currently working on a new campaign that it's still being constructed because we haven't found the correct wording for it, but it's about safe practices that happen on school that doesn't have any criminalization involved. Like I mentioned before, our past campaign was to end random searches, and we won that, but now we have to force our LAUSD, which is Los Angeles Unified School District, to actually enforce it. And we created a contract that said you cannot add more school police, you can't add more SROs, you cannot add anything that is more harmful or criminalizing to students in general. And so we go to these task force meetings that happen, and we make sure that they stand by their word, and it's a signed contract. So they actually have to think outside of the box on what safety is, because safety is not over-policing, and it isn't prejudging people. So that's what's happening right now, currently, along with a new campaign that's happening with budgeting and things like that, because we have too many things that are on campus that spend so much money, like random searches. They spend about $1 million every 2 years, but we don't have a PSW on our campus. We don't have therapists on our campus. We only had one college counselor, and she was also a 10th grade academic counselor, so it was really hard. And we felt that you're spending $1 million on something that doesn't work, because they never found, it was 0 amounts of guns that were found, so they were pretty much wasting money. And a lot of the things that they did find was like hygienic products, like I mentioned before, hand sanitizer, or like highlighters, Sharpies, whiteout, things like that. And they try and make it seem like we use these things for like stupid purposes, if I may say. But that's why they try to keep it, enforced. So right now I'm trying to make sure that we're trying to, as an organization, make sure that the district keeps their word and not add any more criminalizing policies.
Just to talk more about our statewide campaign. So CFJ has 4 different offices across the state, and it's all youth-led. So basically what I've been able to do is to go to Sacramento and have trips over there and just to talk to policymakers about what we believe is important in school. And similar to your campaign, we really just recently have been more openly talking about race in schools and saying how these 3 buckets are important, and talking about race and how to defeat or deconstruct the school to prison pipeline, basically. So for one, investing in staff, making space for relationship building, and empowering student voice. It's not really something that's known, that students are able to go directly talk to these adults saying, I want this to happen in school. There's never a space for that, and apart from like the school board meetings, I guess that's a space. But because students are the ones that are directly getting affected through this education, the staff, the teachers, wouldn't it be necessary for them to openly say what they need for support? And exactly, there's many times where adults come in the room and they're like, we're not going to let these students talk about what we need or what they need, because they're youth. It's a lot of the time people don't really look at youth the same way as an adult, or don't really hear them out. So that's really something that the campaign also talks about, is just empowering student voice, seeing a student for who they are, and not just like, a young child. The second bucket is making space for relationship building. A lot of the impact of the campaign is really just focusing on how a short, like I said, a note, seeing past teachers' own racial bias or whatever is happening in school that they think biases do disrupt how they interact with students, is something that making space for relationship building could improve. So the third one is investing in staff. A lot of the time, there isn't really programs or like funding to help teachers and staff and have these skills in order for them to interact with different racial backgrounds or whatever they haven't experienced before in different environments. There's nothing there that's being like that implements or helps them have this support to talk to these students, how to do it, and that's something that's not really focused on, and that's what investing in staff really means. It's like, it's not the fault, it's not the teacher's fault, it's not the staff fault, it's really where is the funding going, who is the person at the top who's not allowing these things to happen. And so that's basically what our campaign has recently been working on, and we've actually won, I think, $28 million for school climate and parent and student engagement because of like what we've been working with, who we've been working with. So yes, that's what the campaign is about. Okay, so thank you. And so this next question is to Andrew. So how are you supporting positive school climate, and tell us about your approach in working with students, and how does this holistically support students? So like their deeper learning and social emotional learning. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of our work in school climate, even thinking about the word climate, we're thinking about what are all of the factors and systems and structures and influences that create a climate, right? We know it extends beyond a classroom, it extends beyond a lesson plan. It is kind of built into the legacies of structural racism and access to transportation and all of these huge factors that influence what climate and how is that kind of atomized inside of a school, right? So our thought is, how do we create humanizing spaces for young people to be not just students, but young people that deserve dignity, play, exploration, space to make mistakes, and how do we extend that beyond the walls of RYSE? Like, we are a center of 30-some staff, and we are all stacked on top of each other, so the work is building a climate that extends beyond our organization. So a lot of that involves asking questions of who gets to define school climate, who gets to define what safety means, right? And we know that currently who defines safety is the carceral state. We know that who gets to define safety are folks that are endowed with power under white supremacy and cis heteropatriarchy. So we have to then reclaim and shift narrative to build safety in our own definitions and our own visions, and then how do we land that in policy and make that real for teachers that are overburdened, with students that are experiencing so much proximate and vicarious trauma. I think a big piece of our work is pushing conditions. So if we understand school climate being related to trauma-informed care, our work can't just be trauma-informed. We have to acknowledge that the trauma already exists, right? The reality of living as a young Black and brown person in the United States means you're already sort of absorbed into this atmosphere of trauma. So our work is around building healing-centered approaches and atmospheres of healing, whether that's through arts-based strategies, through participatory action research, youth leadership strategies that help young people understand their sort of the political position as students, the legacy of power that young people inherit every single day, that they get up and decide, like, I'm going to participate in my own learning. I'm going to take that into my own hands. I'm going to critique the things that I do not like, however they decide to move that critique. Those are all legacies of power. So our work is really lifting those things up and making sure that the tables that we're allowed at as adults and advocates and allies, that there's seats for young people, and that I know when to shut up when young people can articulate anecdotally and with data that we have to move beyond sort of just imagining school climate as having enough school resource officers and having a plan for a school shooting. Like, we know that school climate extends way beyond that. It extends into sort of the microaggressions that we may experience, that young people may experience from faculty. And we hear it every day when young people come to the center and they're just like, yo, my teacher was speaking super foul at me, right? And how do we create spaces where young people's experiences are validated and they can be transformed into action and be metabolized in ways that are powerful?
So, next question. So basically, districts across California are making efforts to invest in evidence-based approaches to improve school climate. So like social and emotional learning, positive behavioral interventions and support, restorative justice practices. From your perspective as a teacher, what do you think has been a promising practice to improve school climate, and what changes have you seen at your school site and in your students?
Well, I can talk globally at first. I'm kind of glad that in funding we've moved from being 49th to 35th. That's a start. Hopefully, with Schools Community First initiative, we can possibly begin to move that up a little bit more. But I think that is the crux for me globally of what we need is funding. We need to be fully funded. That's the only way we're going to be able, in my mind, to do everything that we want to do for our students. Thank you. I have seen that focus on social and emotional learning. And to me, that means a celebration of the diversity that we see in the classroom. Does that mean that we have Black History Month and Native American, that we go all these different directions? Maybe, but not necessarily. That's definitely not it. It's every single day celebrating the person who they are. To me, that's the basis of social emotional learning, is that you greet them from where they are and try to take them into a place of learning. And I see that with a lot of our teachers at my school site, being a Title I school, of almost all, I would say 90% of our students are students of color. And our teachers have had to make some changes in how they deliver instruction. The rows are kind of going away. The rows of desk and the chair behind the desk. Some teachers have taken the desk out of the room and they have tables. Some teachers move the desk up against the wall and then they have what they call flexible seating. And so we have bean bags and we have everything around the classroom. Many of us are doing whatever we can to try to make it a place of learning for our students, because they do not come to us wanting to sit in the desk for 6 hours a day and say, hello, teacher, teach me. That's not going to work in today's society. A lot more group learning where you're giving them the task and giving them the opportunity just to say, you need to learn. And this is what you need to learn. This is how I want you to learn it, but it's not me standing in front of the classroom always just delivering it. And it's a hard lesson for us, especially the old people like me. It's a hard lesson because that's the way that we were taught to teach. You'd have a lesson, you make your lesson plan, you stand in front of the class, and you let them just listen to how wonderful you are. That's not working any longer. They don't care if you're wonderful or not. So it's being able to step outside of our own boxes. And I see that happening in my district. The home visit program that I believe started in Sac City. We now have that as an office in our district office, the home visit program. That's a district office personnel that come out and train us and try to make sure that we have that as a part of our curriculum. Many of us did those kinds of visits. I've done them before. Some of them were kind of sketchy visits, but I did them before the home visit program because I wanted to make that connection. And I think what they've been saying from the very beginning is it's all about relationship. You have got to build those relationships. If we don't build them, we're not going to have them. We're not going to reach those students. You won't have those students coming back to you to invite you to their quinceañera, to invite you to their college graduation, to show you, their pictures of their little girl and their little boy. You don't have that if you don't build that relationship. The parents who come back and say, you were the best teacher he ever had. Oh yeah, I remember him, yeah, I do. But those are the things that we have to do. And I see us beginning to do it, but still coming back to funding. If we don't have, because as Andrew was talking about with the trauma that our kids are coming to us with, if we don't have the mental health specialists on campus, if we don't have the counselors, which most of us in elementary schools do not, and in high schools, they really don't. And I could talk about when I was younger, all those things that we did have. We did have a counselor. I could go see my counselor every day in high school if I wanted to. I know, I'm dating myself. But I could go, I did dissect frogs in science in high school. Those weren't dreams. Those were things that were actually a part of my curriculum, a part of what I did. Why don't our students have that? Why not?
I'd also like to open the question to Marshé. So just to repeat the question is what is your district or what is your organization doing to make efforts to improve school climate? So what are those practices that are being done in school?
A practice that we had at my high school was restorative justice. And I know a lot of people are like, restorative justice doesn't work. And I want to address that by saying it does work if you do it right. So that's the truth. I mean, a lot of people think restorative justice is sitting there with a kid who may have had a problem or an altercation and putting them in a circle and having them talk it out. That is not restorative justice. It may temporarily solve that problem that you have, or they might just say, oh yeah, we're cool, just for you to get out of their face. But restorative justice is actually investing yourself into that student like Shelly was saying, like you need to build that relationship, because oftentimes that we learn is that if there's a problem, if we don't trust you, we're not going to you. It's going to stay deep down inside, which is then going to cause more problems later on for us. And then, so that's just one of the practices that I wanted to uplift. And another one is really just being there. And I know that sounds so simple, but it's the truth. Like, just being there for a student, noticing when they're down or when they're happy, congratulating them, really just showing that you care, because they're always like, when you go in the office, they're like, your teachers care about you, but it doesn't feel like you care about me. So you have to just really acknowledge, and I know that's really hard because you have like 50-something students in your classroom, but just acknowledging them, not an overall thing like, you all are great today. No, like, hey, you're great. Like, I loved your essay, your paperwork, and I feel like that really helps build the self-esteem that they need to then go out into the world or into different classes and really do the best that they can, because they believe that they are great, and it was all because of you and putting trust into them and confidence. So.
So one specific thing that we've been doing through Californians for Justice and our Relationships Under Schools campaign is just having racial bias training. So that is one practice that's been working. A lot of the time it's not really something that's focused on by like educators. It's like, oh, I'm cool, like I don't really have those things happening in my brain. I'm not thinking that. But a lot of time, a lot of us do have those biases and are like really deeply rooted in us. And it's something like as a teacher, any one short comment can really just impact a student to a full extent where they're like, oh, I don't want to go to school anymore. Like, why am I even going? Things like even things from home and coming to school, a short comment, something just really small could affect them in a great way. So racial bias training is just something that's been happening, and even though it's not really like some districts have been like, oh, I don't really want to invest in that, it's really been a great practice. A lot of educators write down things that they've like thought of, just acknowledging what you as an educator do when you interact with certain people, see different things is really just impactful. And I think that's something that the Relationships in Our Schools campaign is just really focusing on. So yeah, that's a practice. So to continue with the question for our teacher, all educators are part of creating a positive school climate on campus. So how can teachers, science teachers, math teachers, English teachers support creating a positive school climate on campus? I think you already spoke a little bit on it, but just...
It's kind of a school culture. School culture has to change. It can't be the math teachers are thinking this way and the history teachers are thinking this way. If we are going to make change at our school, it has to be a cultural change. And it could start with a team. I have heard of some schools that have started with their own team, and then it's just kind of filtered out into the whole school, and until no one could be without this because they were going to be all alone. But it's a culture change, and it's school-wide. And so that everyone is following along with what is going to make our campus a campus that's moving forward with our students and for our students. Social emotional learning, implicit bias. You know, we have to be honest about it. We might have to read White Fragility. We may not like it, but we might need to read it and have a book study. Those are things that we just might need to do as a school, and having that investment, having your administrator say, this is what we are going to invest in to do together. And you will always have a group that's going to be over to the side and say, I'm not, I can't, I'm retiring, it's not going to happen. You will always have that, but eventually they're going to have to join or they're going to be all alone.
Exactly. So just to like start closing off to everyone, to myself too. What are promising practices you want to uplift? So like if we're talking about campaigns, like just the process and the work that you've been doing, what are some practices that you really just want to talk about right now and just share? Anyone want to start?
Everyone's looking at me for some reason.
I'm like,
I can just, Marshé's like, you're gonna go, right? I think one thing I'm thinking about, Shelly, you're kind of lifting this up, is this idea of being siloed, and like we have to be really willing, folks with like kind of the structural power, funders, policymakers, adult allies, like we have to think about how do we break up the silos so that young people can sort of have access to tables with power at kind of every point. So one thing I really want to lift up the work that we've been doing with in our county of Contra Costa is working with the folks that do the prosecution of young people, that do the incarceration, and how are we working in healthy struggle and in partnership with those folks to think about how we're dismantling the school and prison nexus. So we just established with some really deep collaboration with Impact Justice and the Office of the Public Defender's Office, a restorative justice diversion program, where we are actually able to work with young people, so-called offenders that are committing crime that we may categorize as harmful or needing punishment, and working through a really long process of diversion that removes them from that system. But if we are not willing and we are siloed as organizers and be like, oh, we're not gonna engage with this entity or this entity because they're not down with us or they're not values aligned, those opportunities don't exist. So how do we, as kind of all of these stakeholders, think about how do we break down the siloing that naturally happens? I think when funds feel scarce, when resources and emotional capacity feels like really spent, how are we doing the work of reaching kind of out and connecting with folks so that restorative justice feels real and actionable, and not, as a young person has told me, a circle of adults quietly yelling at me, right? Like when that's what we're hearing, that is the anecdotal, data-driven feedback right there, that we gotta work on our practices. So we gotta walk the walk, and we have to be able to do it with folks that we might not otherwise see as partners.
Okay, so I'm gonna name two practices, and the first one is a practice that Students Deserve have gotten from Black Lives Matter, which is the invest divest, which means that you divest from something that is potentially harming, or like for example, random searches. That was harming students' mental and emotional state because they felt like they were always doing something wrong, and that it was just something wrong with them, when in fact it was the entire policy, but that had an effect on them, and it took $1 million out of our school's budget. So instead of doing that, we take that $1 million from there and we put it into college counselors, we put it into academic counselor, PSWs, mental health services, having just more healthy things that are on campus that are good for the students. And then the second practice that I want to uplift is community organizing, because I hear a lot of people say, and even sometimes myself, that we have to go to the people in power, but we are the people in power. They only have as much power as we give them. Yeah. We elect them, we put them in those seats. So all of us in this room, we are the power, and if we choose to give them that power, that is as much power as they will have. So those are my two practices: invest, divest, and community organizing.
So a few years ago, I was reading Rebecca Dufour, and it was Whatever It Takes, blah, 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 blah. And there was a little section in there about her SOS program, and it was kind of a mentor program. But it was a totally different, very informal, and so I brought that to my school. And for a year, people just picked someone, and it was anyone on campus. So the secretary, it could have been a yard supervisor, whoever wanted to, would pick a student, and I kept track of who they were choosing, that they were just going to have a relationship with, just send a note to. If the student needed a little time, they could come see them during RYSE, just very small, nothing made, not like Boys and Girls Club or something very big, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, nothing that large where you had to have a commitment of time. It was on campus, it was very small. And it only lasted a year, this was a few years ago, but it was so impactful because the teachers were just coming to me, I just have to tell you what, she sent me a little note, or the students were coming up to me and telling me how much they enjoyed having this teacher or the secretary talk to them. Well, I've just heard recently that the school has now brought the program back again, and they're calling it the Villagers, and now they're getting recognized by the district for their work. They're getting an award from the district for the work that they're doing with the program called the Villagers, which is this kind of mentoring program. And so I want to uplift that kind of small scale relationship building, that little note that you hand to the teacher to put on that student's desk. It could be a Post-it note. Or that student, come by my classroom after school before you go home. I just want to see how your day was. Very small interaction and how important that is to build that relationship.
I think to build on the community organizing, for our campaign in Long Beach, it's been really hard to just talk to the people in the district and be like, this is worth it. Like, invest in like working with like relationship-centered schools and just having this work. It's been really hard to just have that built on. And over the years, it's been a promising practice that like I think I've seen is just starting within with the students, allowing students to organize on their campus and allowing them to tell the people on campus, this is what is working, this is what is not working. And from within, the districts just start seeing how this is really impactful to students. So I know in Long Beach, there's a school, like there's hella gangs, there's like a lot of things happening there, like the school that students don't want to go to, right? And this school was the first one where what the superintendent was like, this is where I want the RCS to start, like, how is it going to work on here? So it's just a lot of the time we were just trying to get students to learn about, oh, like this is what's happening, what do you think you need, and what do you think the school needs in order for it to be improved? And a lot of the time, there wasn't a lot being done to like, oh, like let's support these students and how they want to describe what they need and la la la, and all these types of like, to help them tell people what they require at school. And so a promising practice, I think, is allowing those students to organize on campus, like having those students go to these clubs, showing them the information, because a lot of students, like, they have things to worry about at home too, like they have to work, students have to go home to help and with their siblings, like their mom works. It's like, even that, it's like the school needs to be there to support the students, and like, what do you need? It's not the students, like, they need to go look for that information. The parents needs to go look for that thing that they need. It's like, school's there to support students, not students are going to school. Question for you again. So what are systemic supports that you have received that have supported you to implement these new practices? And what supports would teachers find helpful moving forward?
As I've mentioned before, that's support of your admin. Having that support, them to actually, whether you bring the ideas to them, whether your students do, but they're helping you find a way to make this work at your school site. You know, having that administrator who can also take that to the district office so that other people know that these are things that are happening at my school site, and these are things to be valued at my school site. Of course, the funding source that we have, you know, the LCAP funding that we have is so very important to us because it can help if we know what to do with it and do it correctly. It can help us target the money in the right direction. I think sometimes even my own educators don't even really understand that they need to be involved in that discussion on school climate. That's discipline. Well, how come we're not? Were you involved in that conversation? Well, I didn't. Well, that's why we don't have that. So just making sure that we keep ourselves informed, and then also administration making sure that we are a part of that process, because that by law is the way we're supposed to be a part of that process, and making sure that we hold everyone accountable to that.
Exactly. Just to add on to what you said about the LCAP, I know for me, for one, and my friend who was also part of CFJ, we had never learned about the LCAP until we were in CFJ. Like, it was not something that was told to us, that there was a budget for schools. What is, like, what? Okay. Like, what is that? And it's like, even, like I said before, telling students, like, this is what, there's a budget, like, that you could talk about, what do you want to do with this money? And it's like, having more counselors, having this, more ethnic studies courses in our schools, things like that. It's like students don't even know where the money is going. And like half of the time, like students don't need Chromebooks, students don't need more police on campus. Like we don't need we need more counselors. We need to pick our own, like who do we want as staff at our school, even allowing students to be like on a board, like who we want to hire, who they like is something that's like impactful. And like I think just telling students like about the LCAP is like a starting point, because like half of the students on campus don't even know what that is. So to everyone, how can we meaningfully center student voices in policy development, especially to create enriching school climate for all students? And that is a question for all of us. So who wants to go first?
We're looking at Andrew again.
Those goes.
I can go. How to meaningfully.
Yeah, how can we meaningfully center student voices in policy development?
Oh, that one's easy. We talk to the students. We inform the students and we give them the platform that they need. Because like you mentioned earlier, people look at the student and they're like, you're just a child, you don't know what you're talking about. And if that child does not know what they're talking about, guess whose fault it is? Like, we need the information that is brought down from someone else to you and then given it to us so that we know, like you said, you didn't even know that schools had budgets because no one ever told you. And I feel like if we want students to have a place in policy and in government, we need to be taught about those things. And I feel like a lot of times when people are like, young people vote, we don't know what we're voting for. Sometimes we don't even know what the policy is or who the person is about unless we see like a snippet of it on the internet. And we need to really be taught those things. And another thing is like diversing the students that you're talking to, because one thing that works for another student might not work for the next. So like for me in my community, having more police on campus is a no-go. We don't want that because in our community we have such bad relationships with police officers that we do not want to have to deal with the prejudice and the racist cops that are outside of our school and then have to go back in school and deal with them as well. So that's not a solution for us, and I don't think that's really a solution for any student, but that just goes to show that you really have to talk to different students from different demographics, low income, high income, white, black, Muslim, Christian. It just really depends on that student, and if we want to have students in policy and in government positions, because like the old saying goes, students are your future. Like when you're in a retirement home, we're gonna be leading the country. So when that happens, I bet you're gonna wish you would have told us about what happened in schools and the policy. So I think those are the two things.
Adults need to cede power in meaningful ways, in real ways to young people, right? Like we have to be willing to let go of ownership of decisions, the adultism that's inherent to that, to keep young people, to welcome young people to be engaged in policy, both in creation, implementation, and practice. So that means like, yeah, passing policy is like, that's an amazing win. And then where the win leaves sails is when we have to implement. Because implementing is like, oh my goodness, like how do we get everyone on board? How do we build buy-in? How do we make sure that everyone's even using the same definitions? And those are the moments where young people need to have the power to hold adults accountable. So when we are not on our P's and Q's, young people need to be able to be like, you need to figure this out, and if you don't figure it out, we are not going to give you this job anymore, right? And that has to be a real threat, and so that means like in kind of the boards that we can sort of, accountability boards that you can develop around policy, like young people have to be written into those as a mandate, and we have to do the very difficult work of making sure it's the right young people, the young people that are most impacted by these inequities to be at the decision-making table. Too often, I've been to district meetings where all the young people that are at the LCAP kind of meeting are young people that have been traditionally tracked into success, that are seen as traditionally successful students, and then they're making decisions on policing in school when they don't have contact with police because they've never been locked up, right? They've never been pushed out of school. And that's adults ducking the work of building young people's capacity to, like, for young people to understand how we're talking about policy, how we're talking about legislation. Because young people know it intuitively and intimately when they're bucking up against systems of power. Our work is around how are we doing our own code switching so we understand how young people are communicating to that power. So we got to lean into the work and stop just kind of being like, yeah, but it's really hard, and am I going to do a home visit? I don't even, I'm scared of that neighborhood. Like, we have to interrogate our own stuff to do that real work as adults, and then step back.
They have truly said it all in many respects. I know in our district, our superintendent has invested in Arbinger training for the district. And while it's not social justice or social emotional learning, I think for him it's a way to kind of bring us to get out of this box that we're in. I think that's one of the terms from the training that you get from the Arbinger. And so I think that helps us to open ourselves up to, it's not a one size fits all, and we all have to do the work, and the work is different for every single person, but we have to do the work. We have to open up our minds, open up our hearts a little bit, and give ourselves open to what we all need to learn. I have unconscious bias. I keep hitting this because I'm so used to using my hands. I have unconscious bias, and I have to be willing to accept that and hear what people are saying to me. And we all can do that. And that's the only way, to me, that we're going to be able to help our students if we can open ourselves up and say to our students, hey, I'm here to listen to you. But they have to know that you're willing to listen to them as well. They have to know that. They're not going to want to if they say, oh, I don't need it. You need it. No, you need it too. And we have to be open about that.
Okay, so building on today's conversation and with the wide representation of teachers and community organizing students, that we're all dedicated to educational equity in the room, what do you envision for California schools, and what do you want to see happen to create safe and affirming environments for students? So, who would like to go first?
I can go again. I want to see schools in California address the whole student from head to toe, and we talked today about so much from like laws and budgeting to actually having bilingual services in schools, and I feel like from A to Z, everything needs to be addressed for a student because we are not just one part, we are multiple things. And that goes from having multiple range of class choices and ethnic studies, language classes, creativity, mental health services, academic services. There's just like so many things that a student needs, and I feel like I want to see California's money be invested into that instead of harmful things. As just a whole.
There's really no saying it better than that. So, those things.
On the elementary level, I would like to see our students have that opportunity to find that voice even as early as elementary, through that conversation, through the group work that they're doing, meaningful group work, not just saying, go sit in a group and I'll get back to you and here's a worksheet that you fill out, but meaningful work where they learn how to be able to talk with each other and listen to each other. We have done so much with Chromebooks and things of that sort, and I love them. As an educator, I love having the Chromebook, and it's a tool, but like you said, we don't need another Chromebook. They need to be able to understand, because you don't have a Chromebook when you're across at the assembly room. There won't be a Chromebook there. They might be typing on, when you stand in front of the assembly, you can't use a Chromebook. So you need to be able to communicate with people, and if I can begin to build that, or have a school that begins to build that way of learning how to communicate and talk with each other and learn from each other at the elementary level, how wonderful would that be when they reach college?
Amazing. I think, yeah, I think what I want to see in schools, I want schools to be supportive, welcoming to all students from all different backgrounds, and for them to be safe and like whatever that means. So I know for me, I had the privilege of going to a school where it was invested in, it had staff, it had counselors. It was like in the more affluent part of town. That for sure was a reality, but I saw my friends from like Cabrillo, the school that I talked about, who was dignified, the one that was ghetto, the one that had gangs there, whatever it meant. It's like just seeing how schools need to take into account where these students are coming from, what happens at home, what they need in order for that to be, for them to get the same level of education, the same level of support as that affluent part of the neighborhood. I think that's what I want to see a reality for all schools, for students coming out of the schools to all have the possibility of going to higher education. Yeah, and that builds positive school climate for sure.
That's true.
Yeah. Hold up. Where'd my card go? So how much time we got? 5 minutes left. I guess we're like ending early then. Because that was the last question.
All right.
Like, what? Okay, so to close it off, thank you all for speaking. It was really nice to meet you all. We just met before we got on here. So to conclude, California just invested 15 million, well 28 million, because we went to AB 2820. California just invested 28 million in positive school climate practices. There is an opportunity for every school district to embrace the best practices we talked about today, if they're willing to listen to students and have them be a part of the policy development and decisions. So yes, thank you.